Alright, so this clip's going to be looking at the different principles of criminal liability. So there are 5 different principles of criminal liability, so when you get your criminal liability question in either your SAC or exam, these are the 5 different principles that you want to be focusing on and structuring your answers around. So the first one is elements of a crime, presumption of innocence, burden and standard of proof, age, and participants in a crime. Okay, so I'm just going to run through these 5 different principles and explain them a little bit more in depth. Okay, so the 2 different elements of a crime with which you should be very familiar are actus reus and mens rea. So actus reus being a wrongful act or an act that is against the law, and mens rea being a guilty mind or mental state. So you're aware that what you're doing is a crime. Next we have presumption of innocence. So the presumption of innocence is that any person accused of committing a crime is presumed innocent until proven guilty, and importantly, they need to be proven guilty beyond reasonable doubt, which is also the standard of proof, but we'll get to that in a second. Alright, so burden and standard of proof. The burden of proof is it's the duty of the prosecution to prove that the accused is guilty of a crime. So that's pretty straightforward, and I'm hoping that you're all fairly familiar with that concept before your SAC. And the standard of proof, which I just addressed, is that the prosecution must prove that the accused is guilty beyond reasonable doubt. So if the magistrate or jury is not convinced beyond reasonable doubt of the accused guilt, then the accused should be given the benefit of the doubt and they won't be found guilty. Okay, so the next principle of criminal liability is age. So you can't be charged with a crime in Victoria if you're under the age of 10. However, you can be charged after the age of 14. But it's between the ages of 10 and 14 where it's considered that you don't possess sufficient understanding to know what you're doing or what you're doing is wrong, and that concept is known as the principle of doli in capax, and that's an important concept for you to remember. Okay, so finally, there's 2 different sorts of participants in a crime, and they can be classified as either a principal offender or an accessory to the crime. So a principal offender is the person who actually commits the crime, and an accessory is a person who knowingly impedes the apprehension, prosecution, conviction, or punishment of a principal offender.